Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining the webinar. We'll get started in a few moments, but while we wait, if you would like to introduce yourselves in the chat, let us know where you're sort of dialing in from. That'd be great. Good to see you both, Rolly and Alex. How are you doing?
Very good, thanks, Richard. Yep.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Yeah, good, thank you. Very good.
I think you're dialing in from Hampshire today, are you?
I am, yes. So, yeah, quite nice. You're both in London.
Yes. Kentish Town.
Very nice. In the office?
Yep.
Good.
That's right.
We'll start in a couple of minutes. We'll be chatting for about sort of 20 minutes, half an hour or so, but there'll be plenty of time for sort of questions and comments at the end.
Right.
Hi Neil, good to see you. Right, if we sort of go into introductions, and then for those that a little bit late joining, they'll hopefully be here in time for the content that we're going to go through. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Richard Brereton. I'm the customer success lead at Appraisd, and I'm joined today by Alex King and Rody Walter. Good to see you both.
Thank you, Richard. I'm Rowley Walter, founder of Appraisd, and yeah, really looking forward to going through some of the these kind of highly technical features in Appraisd, but we're going to try and make them really digestible and useful to everyone on the call. So yeah, thanks a lot for inviting me.
Yeah, and I'm Alex King. I'm a product manager at Appraisd, oversaw the implementation of this feature, and looking forward to demo it.
Great. And this is, I think it's the second one now in our Appraisd Expert series, which is a series of short webinars that we go through various bits of advanced functionality in Appraisd and things that can really add value to performance management processes sort of over and above your more sort of typical appraisals and components of it. So today we're going to be talking about automated calculated scores in Appraisd. They getting increasingly popular at the moment amongst our clients. We do have many clients that still have ratings as an integral part of their performance management process, and calculated scores, one of the things that it can do is enable a consistent approach to taking ratings that have been provided as part of the performance management process and aggregate them up into overall ratings for various components and overall performance scores. So this can be particularly crucial if things like overall scores are linked to performance or pay or bonus of any of those kind of things, because it means that no matter what sort of scores people have, there's a consistent approach across the organization to how that overall score is calculated. We also see it feeding into calibration exercises. So for those of you that joined our previous webinar, we touched on how calibration is a particularly important part of process, particularly when those things such as sort of pay awards or any sort of financial remuneration is based on overall performance scores. So we can have a calculated score that then goes into that calibration process and ensures that consistency that I talked about before. We'll be running through a few different types of calculations in Appraisd today. So things, sort of components that we'll be running through that are included in calculations. So different elements of performance, such as behaviours or skills, objectives, 360 feedback. We'll run through how you can assign different weightings to different parts of different scores and different parts of that performance, how they then roll up into overall ratings, how we can make it mandatory for people to provide certain scores so that they're not missed out of that rating and performance evaluation. And then we'll touch on some reporting at the end. We've also just a bit of housekeeping before we started. We did a recent survey on this sort of HRIS piece. So Alex, if you could talk a little bit about that and circulate the link before we get into the content of the webinar.
Sure. Yeah. Next up that we're working on at the moment is implementing some new built-in integrations with various HRIS systems. We're just querying clients to hear which HRIS systems do you use. Do Do you already sync your data? How are you doing it? What kind of data are you syncing in? And the aim is really to help us prioritize the different systems, make sure that we're covering as many use cases as possible. So it'd be great to hear from everyone as to what you're using.
This webinar part of the Appraisd community, which we've launched recently. I think a poll's going to flash up soon about people's interest in maybe attending a live Appraisd Experts webinar or another type of event in London. So please fill that out. And now over to Alex to show the first example of calculated scores.
Thanks, Richard. I'll just get sharing that screen. And hopefully everyone can see this now. So I'm logged in as a manager called Jenny, and we're going to be looking at a pretend annual review for one of our team members, John Parker. Now, it's worth noting that the way I've constructed this form is not a sort of normal flow of an annual review. Instead, each section is to show off a couple of different things that we might do as part of other types of annual reviews using the calculated scores or calculation engine. So the very first section we have is a very nice and simple one, which is, let's pretend you do some behaviors and you rate those from 1 to 5 using a numerical rating scale. So as a manager, if I go through and start providing these, what we'll see is at the bottom of the screen, we start to generate an average score based on the ratings that I provide. Now, this updates anytime I provide a new rating. So if I change it or even remove a rating, you'll see that the score changes. In this example, we're not requiring that all questions need to be answered, and the only ratings that we're considering are the manager ratings that I'm providing.
Great. Okay, so Alex, this looks good. So am I right in thinking, so we would work with a client to put this calculation into the form, or actually there are some calculations available out of the box they can just choose themselves, such as an average of ratings in a section. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Yes. So this one is in fact an out-of-the-box calculation, which takes the average of all the ratings within a given section from the current user. Now, there are definitely clients out there that have more complicated versions of this. They might want to take an average of the employee ratings and the manager ratings together to create a score. Now, all you need to do is speak to your customer success manager, and they'll help you construct that kind of calculation.
Great. Okay. And then my next question is around when the calculation is done. So, yeah, does it get sort of locked down?
Very good questions. So the calculations will run anytime you have answered all of the required questions that are contained within the calculation. Now, in this particular case, there are no required questions, so it's run every time I answer any of the questions. We'll see in a later example what it looks like when we are required to answer all of the questions before the calculation is run. In terms of it getting locked down, yes, it gets locked down as soon as you submit your responses. Much like submitting any other response, a calculated response acts in the same way and can be unlocked just the same way by rolling back the review as well.
Got it. Okay, I'll save my other questions for the next section.
And something that's also worth noting at this point, you may have a number of different sections with different parts of performance in there. You might have something else with how people are demonstrating values, etc. And we see many clients having this overall average at the bottom of each section. So you can see how the employee is performing in each area of performance. And then those averages for each area may then get rolled up into an overall average that we'll see later on.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And in fact, I have an example of that at the end. So that's a really nice one to show off. What I'll move now into is a slightly different, more complicated version, but works in much the same way. In this case, some clients choose not to use numerical ratings, but they still want to get averages. It especially helps with their reporting. And also, as we'll see later, you can sense check whether some managers are giving higher ratings on average, whether they're correctly distributing their ratings, those kinds of things. So in order to facilitate that, what we can construct in Appraisd is hidden numbers behind worded rating scales. So here, the ratings are exactly the same. Actually, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But the managers and end user and the employee don't get to see that. So if we start providing these, one thing you'll notice is that the average down at the bottom does not start calculating. And that's what Rowley alluded to before, which is if the other questions are required, we don't calculate the score until all of the rating required questions are given. And at the very bottom, there are some of our clients out there that choose to use emojis for their rating scales, be that, perhaps sort of these kind of up and down arrows, or happy and sad faces for well-being. All of these can also have the same hidden numbers behind to help you make sure that you can keep on track of these and report on them more reliably.
Right. So, sorry, Alex, but yeah, I've certainly seen some quite creative uses of this tool. So not just thinking about numerical ratings on competencies or anything like that and finding an average, but actually just it could be validation or just simply counting the number of responses on a page, which can be really useful, really interesting in in a well-being check-in or a career conversation or anything like that. You can be very creative with kind of sucking the data in from one part of a form and outputting it in some kind of aggregate form in another. So if any clients are listening and they're kind of interested in any unusual cases like that, then do get in touch.
Yeah, 100%. Another one I've really liked is you can also use this for feedback giver responses. So when they provide their responses, if they have a choice of answering up to 10 questions, you can take counts of how many are they choosing to respond to. It can give you an indication on, is your form structure right? Should you have less questions? Are they all being answered? Which ones are answered more than others? Those things can be really useful to report on, and you can calculate using this engine as well.
So Alex, in the reporting on this, obviously we are showing overall text ratings to the employees here. Do HR or administrators have the ability to see the numbers that sit behind those and how people may sit within the band of above expectations? Is there a sort of variance in the rating that sits behind that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It depends on the way that we configure it. In this particular case, exactly right. So what I've chosen to do is output the text, but hidden behind the scenes, available to HR and reporting, will be the numerical average as well. And in this particular case, it's calculated to 1 decimal point. But if you wanted more granularity, we can actually increase that more as well.
And we can also, for each of these ratings that get output, we can determine the exact range of ratings that sit behind that. So you could, in this instance, have it simply sort of averaging up to the nearest number and then output the rating that is equivalent to that. Or you could have something a bit more bespoke. So you may want to say, for example, that it's actually 4.75 to 5 is the top rating rather than sort of 4.5 upwards. So you have control over exactly the range of responses that the range of ratings that corresponds to each value.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we often see these when people have sort of targets. So if there's banding on targets achieved for the different grades, you can use it for that as well, which is very effective.
Great. So I think, Alex, you're now going to show us about ratings on objectives rather than just the questions within the form.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So up next, we've got the objectives section. And at the top, we have the most common use case of objectives. They're non-weighted. And as you can see, John's rated these objectives for himself. I've provided 2 of the ratings, but if I go ahead and provide the third, like so, what will happen is we'll generate a rating nice and simply. And then, as we'll see later, this can be combined with other average ratings that we use in the system as well. Just below, for those clients that do use weighted objectives, of course, we can do weighted averages as well. So I've actually set these up exactly the same scores. And what we do is if I provide the same rating here, a 1, and save, we'll see that the average here, because it's weighted more highly, that does drag down the overall average rating lower than in the one above with no weighting. Worth noting as well that if you have weightings for other things, so other types of questions, like if your behaviours had different weightings, we can include those as well. But I chose to show it here on the objectives because this is the most common use case.
And Alex, what would happen if an employee or manager hadn't weighted the objectives correctly when setting them?
Great question. So yeah, if you use a weighting scale that goes up to 100, what we do is we add some validation to the form, and in fact, that's actually here as well. So in this case, the form set up to expect all the weightings to add up to 100. If it doesn't do that, the rating won't calculate and you can't progress. If the rating, the average rating that is, won't calculate, and you then can't progress if it hasn't been calculated. So that way we restrict them. They'll need to go and adjust those weightings to make sure it matches your criteria. That's not a requirement. If you happen to use different kind of weighting scales, those can be accommodated as well. But the most common by far is to do percentage weighting.
Great, thank you.
No problem.
And
okay.
We've just got objectives here. What about if people want to have ratings on development goals or any other types of goals in the system?
Yeah, absolutely no problem. They all work just the same. Whatever your rating scale is on them, we can accommodate it, whichever type of objective it may be, personal development plan. Also, if you're a company that uses milestones and perhaps you have milestones achieved, you give them ratings or you give them a percentage achieved, say between 0 and 150%. We can also use those ratings as well.
Great,
I've got a question here. Does it provide the average score on the appraiser's score or combined with the appraisees? So yeah, would one of you like to take a shot at that, Alex? Maybe you, Alex.
Sure, I can. In this particular case, we've calculated it just with the manager scores. And in fact, that's happened in the first 3 sections that we've already demoed. The only scores that we're taking into account are the manager scores. However, if you wanted to, you could, you have a number of choices. One, you could combine them so that you combine the employee and the manager ratings. Or if you would prefer, you can have 2 averages calculated. So the employee's average will show and the manager average will show. That can be nice for reporting on as well, because you can have a look at how frequently a manager is over or under rating in comparison to their team members. And that can lead to some quite nice reporting, and yeah, it does nicely show and form part of discussions between the employee and their manager often.
Perfect. Great. I think we're now going to be moving on to looking at how 360 feedback can be rated, and we can pull in responses from other people into rating calculations.
Yep, exactly. So this section here is a 360 feedback section. Every response has been provided by a feedback giver. There's no responses here from the employee or the manager. And what we can do is, for each question, we might, especially, there's only 6 here, but if you had, say, 20 respondents, a nice thing just to help managers get a quick overview of, how are their team members doing, is to give an average for each question. So we can see here, teamwork is averaging out to 3.7. And project management at 2.8, communication at 2.5. However, when we look at leadership, that's really low, 1.8, and this is something we might want to address with our team member and have a look at. And of course, we can do an overall average as well. So this gives us an overall average, and then managers can use that to benchmark their team members against each other. And they can even do that in their reporting or through looking in the individual reviews as well.
It's also worth noting at this point, whilst this is a separate 360 feedback section, you could, if you chose to, gather feedback on one of the other sections in the form. So we had behaviours earlier. So if you wanted to get your sort of peer feedback people to give feedback on the behaviours and other parts, you can do as well. And then they can be factored into a general assessment. You could see maybe what's the self-assessment score versus the peer feedback score versus the manager score, and how is the perception of that employee's performance differing amongst those different groups of people.
Yeah, 100%. And another thing that's very interesting as well is visibility. So in this particular case, the peer feedback or the 360 feedback is visible to the employee. But if you're an organization that doesn't have that, it's either anonymous or hidden, we can still make the averages visible if that's something you wanted, or you can keep them as just visible to the manager for them to use in their sort of discussions with the employee. So yeah, the visibility of these averages can be tailored to your needs.
I was just thinking about how you might use that outside of the 360 feedback context, where you've got perhaps the manager can see an average of the ratings that they've given an individual, but that is hidden from the individual. So the average is only in that case used perhaps by the manager just as a sort of a sense check. If they're doing 10 different reviews and they just want to quickly check that they've basically given, they're given the sort of right range of ratings for each individual and do a sort of sense check in their head, then that can be quite a useful feature as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's not just in this feedback section that you can customize that visibility. You can do it anywhere in the form. So exactly as you say, if we had chosen back in these behavior sections to hide, excuse me, to hide the average from the employee, we could have done that as well.
Nice one. Okay, great. What's next?
Finally, well, second to last, in fact, we've got how we can combine all of those other averages together. And I've just done a few examples here. But the first example is just to show that as a manager, just taking the manager ratings, we can weight it, say, 50% between the behavior average and 50% between the objectives average, and come out with a nice single number here. And that can be your overall rating that you might want to show to the user, or perhaps you're using it simply as a guide, and we'll see how that works a little later down on the page. The second one, I wanted to show that you don't need to make all these averages 50-50, and you can use different people's responses. So it's actually come out exactly the same just because of the way that I've answered it. But in this particular case, what we're doing is we're combining the manager average with the 360 feedback average in a ratio of 80-20. And you can see if we go back and change the ratings in here, that those ratings will change in the overall summary section as well. So you can see here that as the manager rating is here, that's what's happened. But actually, because we're averaging against the 360 feedback responses, that one hasn't changed. One more thing that some clients do is they'll use the average, but actually the average doesn't tell the whole picture. There are other things that the employee might have done throughout the year that really means that the manager should have discretion to adjust it from just simply the average of the other scores. So some clients like to do this where the manager gets a discretionary plus or minus 1, and they can simply input this here. You might say that actually they did something great for a particular client that doesn't fit into one of the behaviors, and we just want to raise up that average from 2.4 to 2.9 for the overall rating. And that can be the one that we show to the employee rather than the one that's directly calculated as an average. So there is some flexibility in the system as well.
It's also worth noting at this point that some people will choose to add a text box underneath for the manager to add the justification of why that rating's been adjusted, particularly if this fee is feeding into some sort of pay award. You may want to just do a bit of calibration or just validate that that you as an organization are happy with the manager's justification for adjusting that rating up and down. And if you so choose, you could make it so none of these scores get released to the employee until the entire process is completed and sort of signed off by HR.
Yeah, 100%. And actually, a really nice way of doing this, or that I've seen clients do, is feed it into their calibration process. So in this particular case, we've only got one reviewer, but if you're using a sign-off or a matrix reviewer, perhaps HR is included in the reviews, you can actually leave this adjustment to someone else as well. So perhaps the department head who's signing off the review is actually the one who has the discretion to change it up and down. So it doesn't need to be just the manager adjusting this score. We could change it so it's the sign off doing it. And that feeds nicely into calibration processes often.
Thank you. We've got a few minutes left, and I know that's at least one question. But before we go into that, I think, Alex, you've just got a couple of other examples of some more sort of advanced or slightly different calculations that we might use.
Yeah, so a few clients have had access to this now, and just some of the ones that I've seen that I thought were really cool is some clients still choose to do their 9-box grid talent management type responses rather than using a preset 9-box grid. They like to keep the questions separate. So they've built cool calculations that take the responses and output the 9-box grid for the employee. Of course, these two responses up here could themselves be averages of many other responses in the form as well. And yeah, you can output the different 9-box grid outputs as part of a calculation instead of having to manually choose and there be mistakes and other things like that. Another one is some clients like to convert the format of the individual ratings into a different overall rating format. So some clients have done this as percentages. So if we have a look at an average, we're sort of taking the 1 to 5 scale and then converting it into a percentage, with 2 ones being a 0 and 2 5s being 100%. They're just two examples that we've seen so far. I look forward to seeing more from clients as they get their hands on this and tell us what they want to do.
Great, thanks, Alex. I think you've got a very brief report to show us touching on that, reporting on the variance of how a manager's rating people compared to averages.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Just for this case, I've only done one report, but of course, you can run all different types of report. But the one that I think is really nice and shows off calculated score as well is this kind of report. What we're looking at here is the average for any given reviewer. What's the average rating they've given across their whole team, and what's the variance on it? So I think something quite common that we see is there'll be outliers who score all of their team members very low. But perhaps this is okay. Heather's only got one team member. There's no variance. The other thing as well is I think people often have very close variance of ratings given, and that can indicate that perhaps not enough thought is going into it. We're not seeing that nice bell curve that we're expecting to see. So here we might want to go and have a look at what Holly's scores are. Do all of her team members really score very similarly, or should there be some instruction there on she needs to give more disparate ratings to increase that variance? These are the kinds of things this reporting can show. I just think it's a really nice thing to report on and can help HR identify managers that might need a little bit of extra help.
Excellent, that's really good. Yeah, I've heard this be called things like a rater bias or manager bias and things like that as well. So this is a great tool for HR to be able to check if and where they need to intervene. Excellent.
Yeah.
Great, thank you, Alex. So that's got us through the various bits and pieces that we wanted to show you. As we touched on, these are just some of the examples of how we can use calculations. We have a powerful calculation engine that we can use that we feel is a real sort of strong point of Appraisd and something that we offer that's slightly different to some other people. So no matter what your ideas are of how you might want to incorporate some sort of calculation in your process, please reach out to your customer success team or let us know in the chat, and we'd be more than happy to workshop with you how some bespoke examples for you might work in Appraisd. A couple of other points. We've got CS office hours that will be starting from next week, 28th of June. They're just drop-in sessions, so anybody that has any general questions about Appraised or how you might want to achieve something, it's an open session that any clients can drop into, chat to the CS team, but also chat to other clients, depending on who else drops in. We'll be also having our next Appraised Experts webinar on the 18th of July, and for that we'll be focusing on how to tidy up your accounts, maybe archive off overdue reviews and objectives, but also how to prepare and set up for a round of maybe mid-year reviews or annual reviews or something like that. I think there's a quick poll in there, and then we are out of time, but if anybody's got any other questions, please put them in the chat and we can hang on for a bit. Neil, I think we answered your question in terms of providing the average score on the appraisers or combined with appraisees, but if anything's still not clear, ask a follow-up and we can say.
Richard, just want to ask you about the office hours. This is a virtual.
Yes, that'll be virtual. So there'll be an email going out soon. It'll just be a Teams drop-in link. So that link will be the same for any office hours that we do in the future. So just join that and get involved and ask anything. You don't have to book anything in advance. We'll be there and waiting for anybody that wants to join us.
Excellent. Great.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Rowley. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at future community events and other Appraised webinars.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Yes, bye.
Bye.